Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another fantastic show for you today. Niall, I know it's a few days late, but I'm wearing a green jacket to celebrate your countryman, Rory McIlroy.
A superb victory, which I have to rib Amber Duke about on Friday because she told me he would never win because he's so psychologically flawed, and he came through in the Masters.
I didn't know about that
Amber
opinion
knows
of
a lot
Amber.
about golf, but she was wrong about that one. I'm glad to see. Anyway, on more serious matters, Robbie, tell me what's on your radar.
Happy to get right to it. Now, why won't our new conservative government actually listen to the people on matters of personal privacy? That's our theme today. Look, there's no doubt in my mind that President Donald Trump is delivering on a number of promises that he made to the American people, reducing waste in the federal government, realigning foreign policy to comport with America first, changing immigration policy in a manner that the vast majority of Americans agree with, and so on. But one area where the old guard Republican establishment still has way too much sway is national security. To that end, I am disappointed to announce that Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is about to implement Real ID, which is essentially just a domestic passport system that civil libertarians like myself are correctly wary of. The same tired bipartisan neocon establishment assures us that Real ID is necessary to guard against terrorism. Of course, they also say that about airport security, about taking off our shoes and our belts in line to board airplanes, which we all know by now is completely pointless, costly, and inefficient. It's a ritual we participate in without any reason because we are forced to by people who pretend to know better, even though they have been discredited time and time again. So, what is Real ID? This is yet another security measure forced on the American people in the wake of 9/11. It's a method of keeping the American people monitored and measured and counted, even though, as Republican Representative Thomas Massie has consistently pointed out, access to proper documentation was not something that stood in the way of the 9/11 hijackers. It's also not, as Massie notes, about election integrity. What it's about is creating a database of Americans, one that may prove intoxicating to hackers. J.D. Tuchile, a colleague of mine at Reason Magazine, writes that consider Real ID to be hacker bait, that Real ID's linked databases contain the amassed hacker bait details of millions of identification documents necessary for air travel and for access to government facilities. Yes, hacker bait. The IDs and database will simply create an irresistible target for identity thieves. Real ID harms national security by creating yet another trusted credential for criminals to exploit. That's from the Electronic Privacy Information Center. And other critics point out that identification documents are incapable of catching terrorists who haven't already been identified as threats. They say such systems inevitably develop system creep. End quote. Now, does that all sound like a good idea to you? Forwarding our personal identification information to the federal government in the form of a database that could easily be hacked by our adversaries? Of course that's not a good idea. Former Representative Ron Paul, a libertarian and a hero of mine, knows it's not a good idea. Let's actually listen to what he had to say recently.
I'm not very happy with the direction we're going right now. It looks like we're going to lose a lot more privacy if this bill gets reopened and made much worse, and it looks like it can do a lot more damage yet to come.
Yeah, it's been sitting around. It passed in 2005, and it's just been sitting around. No one's done anything to it. No one has really enforced it. Now, all of a sudden, Kristi Noem wakes up and says, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and enforce this.
Now, there is some opposition to this, as Paul's co-host points out, primarily from the right. People like Thomas Massie saying that this new national identification system is fundamentally contrary to everything we libertarians have been fighting for. Let me say this again to the MAGA movement. Beware a takeover by old guard GOP neocons who have no more respect for liberty today than they did 25 years ago when they launched the war on terror in response to 9/11 without a second thought for preserving our cherished liberties. Now, I had high hopes that Kristi Noem might be a different kind of Republican who was prepared to say no to the surveillance state, no to pointless sacrifices that empower statism. Never meet your heroes, I suppose. So this has been delayed time and time again. It's been 20 years since they first proposed it. The power that it will give government to require identification when you're presenting for, the Homeland Security type bureaucracy, they want the TSA to be extended to buses and trains and everything. They want you to have to show ID, moving about the country in an almost Soviet-like system. We should so obviously oppose this. No one has explained why this is necessary for our national security, for preventing terrorism. And the other point against it is that hackers will salivate over having potential access to this information.
We are off to quite a harmonious start on Rising Today, Robbie, because, you know, philosophically, I think we do have some common ground in a degree of skepticism about the national security establishment, you know, military-industrial complex, as it used to be called. And so I do think there are dangers with this. I think the strongest point is the one that you just raised. There isn't, what is the need for it? It seems to be a solution to a problem that doesn't really exist. And it does have that history dating back to 9/11 when, as Thomas Massey pointed out in that quote, the hijackers, the attackers on 9/11 would not, this is not relevant to what happened in that case.
They had passports.
They had passports and they had other forms of ID. So I'm not really sure what solution, what problem it is solving. And in the meantime, it is this incursion. I guess the thing that I would sort of worry about on a broader societal level is whether people, and I include myself in this, are becoming a little bit more defeatist about privacy in a very, very online age, when just by virtue of living in the contemporary world, we leave very frequent digital footprints all the time, about which I'm certainly not persuaded of their privacy, you know.
I think that's definitely a valid point when it comes to the information being collected on us vis-a-vis social media and other things. You know, now we all have that familiar sensation of having Googled or searched for some product or service. It happened to me with my taxes over the weekend. That then all of a sudden now I'm seeing ads for all these kinds of tax preparation services across all of my social media feeds. So that's going to be happening. That's a little bit of the genie being out of the bottle. I just don't see how to even deal with that at all. But this, you know, this is a thing the government is going to require you to have. Unfortunately, I think like 80% of people already have an identification that is Real ID compliant, because states resisted it first, and then they said, actually, it's going to be way too much effort to resist. Okay, when you're renewing your driver's license, you get one that's got a little star on it. It's compliant with Real ID. I checked, mine is.
I did the same. And
so we're just gonna.
We don't have to go to the DMV at least, Robbie. So that's something. Right?
Thank God. A trip to the tax preparation office and the DMV in the same month would be, I'm going to set myself on fire from a libertarian nightmare.
Too much for you to take. The government's tentacles getting you every which way there.
But the defeatist point, I think, is valid. I do suspect that the deep state, the bureaucracy within Homeland Security waited to go forward with this until Republicans were back in power, if they really want to do it this time, knowing that they would have a little bit less opposition if it's because it's something Republicans are doing, and they can kind of say, oh, but we want people, we don't want illegals voting, so isn't it important to have ID, and try to mute a little bit of that criticism. So that's why I've been so appreciative to have people like Thomas Massey, like Ron Paul, who are in good standing on the right, point out that no, this is not what this is about.
I think that's a good point. And to that point, and also the point about the time this has taken, I was researching this topic early this morning, and I was looking for the arguments for it. And of course, some of the arguments against came up as well from the ACLU. I was reading the ACLU's material, and in the middle of it, they say, it will give the Bush administration power. And I was like, what? And of course, they've been fighting that battle since, I think it was 2007, that particular document was from. So this has been ongoing for a long time. We've survived all that time from 2001 to now without without this being particularly relevant, and now it's being imposed.
Let's kick this can a little bit further down the road. That's my advice. Up next, Joe Biden comes out swinging in his first return to the national stage. Did he hit it out of the park? Speaking of kicking, throwing metaphors, we'll find out. Stay tuned.
We're following that old line from tech startups. The quote is, move fast, break things. Well, they're certainly breaking things. They're shooting first and aiming later.
Strong criticism from Trump's predecessor Tuesday night as former President Joe Biden made his return to the political stage.
For the details, we're bringing in Washington correspondent for The Hill, Drew Petromo. Drew, what else did the president have to say?
Well, hey there, Niall and Robbie. These were President Biden's first public comments since leaving office. He addressed the National Conference of Advocates, Counselors, and Representatives for the Disabled. And you heard it just a minute ago. The former president used the opportunity to speak out against the second Trump administration. Biden took aim at sweeping cuts to the federal government and the way they are being implemented. Much of Biden's focus was on cuts to the Social Security Administration. Take a listen to what he had to say about that.
Fewer than 100 days this new administration has done so much damage and so much destruction. It's kind of breathtaking it could happen that soon. They've taken a hatchet to the Social Security Administration. They want to wreck it so they can rob it.
Despite the harsh words, President Biden did not reference his successor by name. Still, the message, critical of President Trump and congressional Republicans, came through loud and clear. President Trump responded early Wednesday morning in a post on Truth Social saying, quote, "Sleepy Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of the United States, has allowed millions and millions of criminals to enter our country through its very dangerous and ill-conceived open border. Sorry, but it's my job to get these killers and thugs out of here. That's what I got elected to do." The Social Security Administration also responded to Biden's remarks in a series of posts on X. The posts accused President Biden of lying and reiterated that President Trump has promised to protect Social Security. Now, and Robbie, back to you.
Thanks so much, Drew. Appreciate it. Well, this was very interesting to see Biden back on the stage. I believe this is the first time he's really spoken out since exiting the presidency. Really the first time we've seen him since the Trump inauguration. Not really surprising to my mind to hear strong, strident criticism of what Trump is doing. You know, Biden, it's worth remembering, left office very unpopular. So I'm not sure he has necessarily even the heft that maybe Obama would have had to criticize Trump in, say, 2016. There is a kind of, well, I'm just fixing the things you really broke. That is kind of the attitude of the American people, that Biden didn't fix things in a satisfying way. But yeah, I'm not surprised to see this. Probably what we were all looking for is evidence of further decline in terms of his ability to speak at all, and I didn't really see any of that there. So
no, I thought he was fine. I mean, I think that the argument he's making is an important argument, particularly from the Democratic side. Whether he is the best vehicle for that argument is a very different question. To your point, he left office with approval ratings around, I think the Gallup rating was 39%, so that doesn't suggest you have some enormous heft of public opinion behind you. Nonetheless, I thought the interesting thing about this was the focus on Social Security, from which the Trump administration is seeking to lay off about 7,000 people from the Social Security Administration. Our old friend Elon Musk, of course, has referred to Social Security as a Ponzi scheme. It is a system on which many, many millions of Americans, about 70 million, receive some sort of form of payment. So it is an Achilles heel for the Trump administration, and Biden was going straight at that in some of the footage we played there. The idea of shooting first and asking questions later, I think, is a valid criticism. I'm not sure if you saw, Robbie, the thing where they initially were saying people making claims would have to appear in person at Social Security offices. Then they backed off that because it would be considered, I think, too onerous to many Social Security recipients. So I'm not surprised he's making the criticism. I think that it is in many ways a very well-founded criticism.
Yeah, this is an advantage that Democrats it plays to a strength they have to call out Republicans who at one point, I think, more seriously consider doing something about entitlements. Now, despite the kind of Elon Musk Doge efforts to go after aspects of it, I actually don't really think there's a major legislative push to reform Social Security or Medicare in ways that I might appreciate, but would not be politically popular. That was one of Joe Biden's more successful political moments I think it was one of his State of the Union addresses where he said, you guys are going to go after it? They said, you're lying. He's like, great, good, then don't do it. And it was a successful moment for him. That said, I've been thinking a lot more and more. Maybe I was talking to Marianne Williamson so much about this because she's a very passionate defender of the entitlement system. You know, the MAGA coalition with the vibe shift to the right among young people, I wonder if this will continue to be as important an issue for Republicans, with younger voters being more and more part of the MAGA base, the Trump base. I wonder if there's going to be a little bit of this is a benefit primary for much older people at the expense of much younger people, and to see what their appetite is going to be to continue being forced to pay into a system that I would argue they're not going to get advantages out of when they have that advanced age.
Well, look, I mean, when I was 20 years old, I couldn't have cared less what pension systems were, either in the public sector or the private sector.
Right.
So it does, I mean, obviously it's something that becomes more salient as you get older. It is worth saying that for all the understandable concentration on younger voters in the media, it is older voters who vote at the highest rates and with the greatest level of reliability.
And increasingly for Democrats, though.
Yeah,
Interestingly enough.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it is, I think, notable that that happens for a start. I also think, there are lots of different factors that play into people's lives in different ways at different ages. So traditionally, the pattern, of course, had been very different, where younger voters were very, very liberal, and then as financial and other pressures exerted themselves later in life, they tended to move toward the right. Whether that pattern has been permanently disrupted or disrupted in the long term, I think that's an interesting point.
Very much so. I don't know whether it's been permanently disrupted, but it's at least temporarily disrupted, and we'll see if it lasts. I'm always eager to engage, as you know, in generational warfare.
Yes.
Well, elderly people reaching their skeleton hands into my the pockets of my fellow millennials
and Gen Z. People who have worked all their lives and contributed to Social Security naturally don't want Elon Musk to be trousering the money and getting away with it.
All right. Next up on Rising, will he ever return? That is a question Senator Chris Van Hollen has as he jets off to El Salvador to get to the bottom of the Abrego Garcia case. We'll discuss. The saga of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man whom one former Trump administration official says was mistakenly deported to El Salvador, continues to unfold.
A federal judge had ordered the administration to facilitate Garcia's return, and the Supreme Court also agreed with that specific sentiment.
Now that same federal judge is ordering sworn testimony from the Trump administration to see if they have taken the proper steps to follow her order.
Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen is trying to get to the bottom of Abrego Garcia's situation.
I'm here at the airport. I'm about to board my flight for San Salvador. The goal of this mission is to let the Trump administration, to let the government of El Salvador know that we are going to keep fighting to bring Abrego Garcia home until he returns to his family.
Senator J.D. Vance tweeted this morning, to say the administration must observe due process is to beg the question. What process is due is a function of our resources, the public interest, the status of the accused, the proposed punishment, and so many other factors. To put it in concrete terms, imposing the death penalty on an American citizen requires more legal process than deporting an illegal alien to their country of origin.
Meanwhile, Garcia's wife, Jennifer Vasquez, also spoke out yesterday.
I find myself pleading with the Trump administration and the Bukele administration to stop playing political games with the life of Kilmar. Our family is torn apart during this scary time, and our children miss their dad so much.
So this, yes, continues to be an issue that is now animating clearly a lot of people on the Democratic side. I don't know. I actually think that some conservatives are probably welcoming the involvement of Democrats at this high a level, including Senator Hollen. I saw pushback from conservatives along the lines of, you didn't even call the family of a woman who was murdered by an illegal immigrant. He was recently convicted, but you're going to get on a plane and go to El Salvador to fight to get back someone who is believed and presumed to be a member of a MS-13 gang. I think conservatives, that's what I'm hearing from them, that they are happy to now have this be the news cycle.
I think that is misdirection on the part of those conservatives who are arguing this, because this gets back to the central issue in this case. And there's been a lot of smoke and mirrors around the central issue. There was, in 2019, an order that this man should not be deported to El Salvador. He was deported by the Trump administration to El Salvador. That is obviously a lawless act. Now, whether it was intentional or not, whether it was an error, it is a lawless act to contravene a finding of the courts. That will have to be remedied in some fashion. The Trump administration says, no, it doesn't. We're not going to do anything about it. So they are positioning themselves to defy the authority of the courts of the United States. And that is obviously a problem because it opens the door wide to continued lawlessness from a presidential administration. They are also arguing, and I think this is something that maybe would concern even libertarians of your persuasion, they're arguing that to bring him back would be interfering with both foreign policy and with the sovereignty of El Salvador. But that means you could deport anybody then on that basis as long as you got them out fast enough and then say, well, they're in a foreign country, there's nothing we can do about it. That can't be allowed to stand because of the really serious dangers it would bring not only to migrants, unauthorized and authorized, but to American citizens as well.
Yes. You know, I'm a libertarian and an independent thinker. I don't have to defend everything the Trump administration does.
To your
I don't
credit,
defend
you don't.
everything the Trump administration does. Yes, I think they should exercise some diplomatic leverage to bring him back. You had Bukele in the White House yesterday. It seems perfectly plausible to do that. I guess if he really absolutely steadfastly refuses, I don't think we should start a world war with El Salvador over it. But there's no reason to try not to get him back. Yes.
But we don't have to start. I mean, we could have asked him for a start when he was sitting right beside President Trump. Trump could have said, "Can we get that guy back?"
And certainly, if it was and I would expect significant diplomatic tools being used to get back American citizens. That is, the government has a responsibility to American citizens, even in cases where it is not the government's fault if an American citizen, traveling abroad, gets arrested in Russia or wherever it is, or the Middle East. Then we all have to have what are we willing to do? How far should we be willing to go in order to get back a person who was taken under those circumstances? And there's a push and pull to those kinds of circumstances. Now, in a circumstance where the American government was at direct fault for putting an American citizen in such peril, we would expect them to really go to the mat to get that person back. So yes, I absolutely take your point, and I am certainly concerned, more than concerned, by some of the rhetoric I hear in terms of American citizens facing such penalties inadvertently. We're going to speak with an immigration attorney today who has accidentally sent some deportation papers. I am very concerned about all of that. But at the end of the day, so they should get this person back. Yes.
Okay.
They're then going to, at this point, I'm sure, if they were to get him back, go through the process of deporting him elsewhere, as they are allowed to do under the judge's decision. Are they not?
As I understand it, they are. Now, that would, of course, involve deporting him to a nation of which he is not a citizen. You'd be deporting him to a third country, a third party, and presumably you would face legal challenge from his lawyers in doing that. If they want to go down that route, then I've much less problem with it. And I think that, you do raise an important point there, because this is getting obscured by the Trump administration, it seems to me, trying to shift the question. So they are saying, well, we have the right to deport illegal immigrants. Yes, I know they do.
Yeah.
But the point is, this guy was protected by a immigration judge's order from being deported to the place where he has now been deported to. Yes. That's why there is such focus on his case, even though I think it was Caroline Levitt yesterday described the media focus on it as despicable. It's not despicable. The point of the whole thing is they are acting illegally in deporting this guy to El Salvador. Right. They could also, I should say, in terms of other alternative routes they could go down that would certainly be legal, they could have argued that the order that protects him from deportation to El Salvador should be revoked, and they're free to make that argument.
Right.
They have not made that argument, which I think does cast further aspersion on these claims of MS-13 membership, which he denies.
Right. But you're not making the claim. There was due process in his case. He went through a case of being before a judge and making a determination about, initially, going back to 2019 for saying that he could be deported. He then basically did an asylum claim type situation in order to not be deported to El Salvador. And yes, so he has been subjected to due process.
Well,
the government made a mistake they should correct.
Right.
But he was not grabbed at random without any kind of. He's been through years now of a. There there was a process in place. This is not a...
Well, hold on. He had due process through the 2019 cases that you have just described. He was then apprehended recently and deported wrongly. So the due process in 2019 has been defied or abrogated by the Trump administration's behavior toward him.
I think a lot of people would make the argument, would take the side, this person already went through a court decision to decide whether they are a member of a gang that has been labeled a foreign terrorist gang. That determination was yes, and now years later this person has been removed from the country.
Right, but he has been removed from the country to a place that the courts prohibited him from being removed to.
And the Democratic Party is going to try to move heaven and earth to get him back into this country.
Well, because they think that it is important that an administration should uphold the law and should be subject to the law. The Trump administration is arguing it doesn't really matter what the courts say, or proclaiming in the most disingenuous manner possible that the Supreme Court judgment was a judgment in their favor. I saw a clip of Trump earlier this morning saying that they had won a 9-0 victory. I think the interview was broadcast last night. They didn't do anything of the sort. The second sentence of that Supreme Court ruling notes that it was illegal to deport Mr. Abrego Garcia to El Salvador.
Next up, can CNN save itself? We will talk to journalist Steve Krakauer about the network's plan to reinvent the wheel. Stay tuned. CNN's newest chief, Mark Thompson, is planning a Hail Mary of sorts to save the network. In a recent exclusive, Thompson told the Financial Times that he's launching a suite of digital subscription services as part of a wide-ranging overhaul, adding, quote, "Our entire industry is going through a revolution. The landscape is going to continue through the stresses and strains of an enormous disruption of audiences and of the media in general."
CNN did see a little boost after President Trump's second inauguration, but it has consistently fallen behind Fox News and MSNBC in the ratings. Will these changes turn CNN's ratings around? Joining us now to weigh in is media journalist Steve Krakauer. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So what do we make of these changes? I mean, on one hand, they don't seem necessarily implausible changes in the current media environment for any organization, but CNN obviously having some, I think, identity problems generally. Where do you think things stand for them?
Yeah, I think Mark Thompson has correctly diagnosed that you need a bit of a revolution to compete in this new media environment. I'm not so sure they're there yet. I mean, there's two sides of this. The first one, which I think is just kind of the business end, and then there's the editorial end. On the business side, he's absolutely right. I think that there needs to be wholesale changes in how CNN makes money. People are fewer and fewer are going and just turning on their television in a linear way and consuming content. And then, of course, then you get into ad rates for Nielsen ratings, et cetera, et cetera. So I think he's right. Go to the CNN website, probably expand beyond just the typical offerings of what happened or what is happening into much more exclusive, unique areas. I think that that's the right idea. Now, I'd be very curious to see the execution. And a lot of that gets back to the first area of editorial, which is the talent. Who are the people that will represent this new revolution of CNN? And I have to say, I've been thinking about this as kind of what's the analogy for this? Because CNN years ago, I think anytime you go 2021, let's just say, and they're in an identity crisis, and CNN is like a baseball team that needs a revamp, okay? And instead of they brought in a new leader, so they had Jeff Zucker, and then they had Chris Licht, now they have Mark Thompson. And all these people, instead of saying, let's go and hire some new talent, some new players to get our team a little bit better, they've decided to take the same players and say, okay, now we're going to be a football team. No, okay, now we're going to be a soccer team. You can't do that. That is going to be a totally losing proposition here. You need new people in the building because the audience knows that you're the same team. So I think that's really what it comes down to. If you really want to revamp CNN, you need to have new talent. You can't just simply shuffle the deck chairs of the Titanic.
It goes to show how confused the business model is. Like, if you were just to ask me how CNN is doing, I would have actually said since the election, I've found I find CNN clips more interesting. I see more of them on social media. There's some really interesting panel discussions happening during the day with now, for the first time in forever, like actual conservative voices in discussion. They've had more of Kevin O'Leary. They've had more of other people that, like, it seems like it's actually improved content for me as a viewer, but it's actually not translating to success in terms of people turning on the television and watching, which is the revenue model. So there's something wrong with just that basic problem that going viral and doing well does not necessarily translate to doing well financially.
No, because I think the vibe right now, when you talk about Kevin O'Leary, my mind goes to Scott Jennings. You know,
Yeah,
it's
Scott
like the
Jennings,
Scott Jennings
obviously, yeah.
show over there at 10 p.m. But it's a little bit of stunt casting. It's not necessarily this embrace of ideological diversity that I think we're seeing. You put Scott Jennings on a panel with 4 people who hate him and a host who sort of hates him but enjoys sitting next to him because, you know, in theory, she's getting some clips out of it. That's not really a recipe for changing the dynamic and building new audience, because I don't think it's not recognizing that the moment has changed yet. And now we're still in the early days. You know, we're only 85 days into this Trump administration. And I do think that this Trump 2.0 really represents something different. Obviously, you've got people like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard who are more traditional of the left, and you've got people like J.D. Vance as a VP who's populist. You've got a coalition that's built, and you're not really reflecting that on CNN when you've got just Scott Jennings on and the same kind of panel and people yelling at him. And yes, those kind of clips go viral, but that's not a recipe for like long-term success or audience change, a real shift in what you're trying to do on the network.
Do you think in any sense is there an inherent problem that CNN faces in that if you take the big 3 in cable news, Fox News has a very clear conservative identity. MSNBC has a very clear liberal identity. CNN, I mean, obviously conservatives see it as liberal leaning. CNN would certainly espouse the idea that it is more neutral. But the point is the clarity about what CNN is seems to me lesser than what Fox News is or what MSNBC is. Is that a problem for them?
For sure. And I think this has been a problem for, truthfully, ever since Donald Trump came onto the scene in 2015. We're talking about 10 years now of this being a problem, because you're absolutely right. MSNBC, if anything, has further embraced their ideological bias, if you will, or just honesty about who they are and what they're becoming, and their positioning in this Trump administration. Their new boss, their Rebecca Cutler, who formerly was at CNN, but I think is making the sorts of hires, the new people that she's bringing in, to embrace that leftward move and going further to the left. Fox obviously clearly up the right, and CNN is in this no man's land where I think that the problem is they are not objective and unbiased. They clearly are not, and yet they are not really resigned to necessarily be that way either. They have people on the air like Abby Phillip, who is the host of that CNN Tonight, the Scott Jennings show that we're talking about, who clearly is coming at it from a point of view, but is refusing to admit that she's coming at it from a point of view. So I absolutely think that in this new media environment, you need authenticity. You need, I think, a real precision in how you come at issues, which I think obviously makes shows like this really successful. You need to be honest about who you are. And that's still, there's this resistance from CNN to do that, because they're refusing to kind of go one way or the other. They don't have to be fully of the left. They don't have to be anti-Trump to simply be more honest about where they're coming at these issues from.
Also, the brand, just media brands in general, have diminished power as younger viewers. They're getting their news from individual personalities all over social media, that kind of thing. It's not the power that the brand has just diminished, or to even replace, say, we're still CNN, so now we'll get a new person, switch this person, we'll move this person here, but that's just not, that doesn't comport with how younger viewers, and by younger I mean like everyone under the age of 75, is engaging with news content. They like personality and individuals and perspective. They like to know what else is going on in that person's life. It's a mix of journalism is now a mixture of journalism and reality TV and entertainment, as are our politics.
It's totally true. And I have to say, I've been watching really one of my least favorite media members, Jim Acosta, kill it on Substack. I have to say, I'm not personally a fan of what he does, but he's doing it in a smart way because he's building a giant audience. I think he's upwards close to 300,000 subscribers on Substack. 5 figures of paid subscribers. So he's making, now upwards of of 7 figures, over $1 million a year right now, based on just my numbers of the math here. I think that he's doing a good job in essentially saying I was too hot for CNN. They couldn't handle me. I mean, he was offered a midnight show. He decided to leave and start his own thing. And that is where this direction that we're seeing just across the media landscape. You're right. People are looking for personalities. They're looking for that deeper connection, whether it's podcast, Substack. That's the new media environment. Now, if I'm giving just a little bit of unsolicited advice to CNN, what I would say is embrace that. Think of yourself not necessarily as a network where you put on the CNN jersey, but almost like a record label. Collect people that are smart and interesting and have diverse points of view, and put them under the umbrella and let them have their new media space, let them have their build their audience independently, but have them collect under an umbrella of CNN, a place where you can find all sorts of opinions and ideas. I would do that. I don't know where they're going to go, but that's I think what you need to do to succeed in this traditional media environment as a legacy media outlet. You've got to think bigger picture about where things are overall.
Steve, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks.
Coming up next, President Trump is waging war against his enemies. New York Attorney General Letitia James is in the firing line. Stay with us. The Trump administration is waging war against New York Attorney General Letitia James. The AG, who won a civil fraud trial against President Trump, is being accused of mortgage fraud. James has been referred for potential criminal prosecution, but is not yet facing any charges.
Trump stripped James of security clearances back in February, along with Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who prosecuted the president in his hush money case.
Now, James is accusing the Trump administration of weaponizing the government, and her supporters see it as the latest example of Trump making good on his promise to seek retribution against his political enemies.
Legal scholar and professor Jonathan Turley went on Fox News to discuss the allegations with Laura Ingraham. Let's take a look.
The irony is perfectly crushing. This is a person who prosecuted Trump for everything short of ripping a label off a mattress. And among the charges that were brought in New York, in not just the civil but the criminal case, was making false or misleading statements to financial institutions.
Clay Travis posted on X, New York AG Letitia James being prosecuted for lying about her assets to get a mortgage after prosecuting Trump for lying about his assets to get a bank loan would be too perfect. They always accuse you of what they actually did. And Roger Stone says, Tish, get this through your extremely fat head. It's not nice. You are busted with indisputable federal mortgage fraud. None of your phony press releases are going to distract anyone. Look for the FBI on your doorstep one morning soon.
Robbie, I don't know why we're quoting Roger Stone of all people.
Well, I don't approve of of Roger Stone, but
yeah.
I do think the broader point that look, this seems like a kind of trivial matter that things were characterized in the way they were in order to get this this loan, but I think it is a fair and valid point that these in particular prosecutions of Trump really hinged on I's not being dotted properly, T's not being crossed properly in order to pursue him. If you try really hard, this is just the case because there are so many laws on the books. If you try really hard to find someone committed some tax or financial matter incorrectly, you will find something. They found something in this case. They found lots of things in Trump's cases. They have a wide range of merit, how merited they are in my view. So I think I do take Jonathan Turley's point here. It
is an embarrassing case for Tish James. But let me first dispute the dot the I's and cross the T's thing in Trump's case. Because Trump was perceived to have gained to the tune of perhaps billions of dollars by misrepresenting his assets. Some of those may be debatable, where you say, well, this property is worth this rather than that. It included, though, him saying that his own apartment in Trump Tower was around 30,000 square feet, when it is in fact around 10,000 square feet. It involved him saying that Mar-a-Lago would be able to be redeveloped when it does not have planning permission for that to be the case, or for a separate Trump building in New York. He basically glossed over the fact that a large number of the apartments are rent controlled, and he pretended that they weren't and they were market value in terms of creating.
How is that different at all in character from Letitia James listing her father as her husband for whatever the tax purposes were?
Because the scale of it is so different. Because in Tish James's case, and I'm not sure that we exactly explained what the issue is. The accusation is that a relative of hers was buying a house in Virginia, and Tish James apparently signed a document saying that Tish James, was buying this in conjunction with the relative. The relative, I think, is her sister, although I've seen conflicting reports about that, and that Tish James, would keep this as a primary residence. That then, again, is allegedly something that would have brought down the mortgage rate on the property. The mortgage on the property was for $219,000 and $780 on a $240,000 home. If she did that, that is wrong, and there should be consequences to that wrongdoing. It seems to me obviously different in scale to Trump inflating his worth and his assets by more than $2 billion over years.
The thing with the Trump case, though, that always disturbed me was that the bank that he represented his financials in that way did not feel taken advantage of or ripped off, and this was not the case of a bank saying you ripped me off by saying something. This was the case of the government saying you did something fraudulent. But if I borrow money from someone and they don't agree that I've misrepresented myself, then what is the public interest or the government interest in saying, no, I disagree with you. You did misrepresent it. That's what troubled me about this one.
The government interest in that case is preserving the integrity of the system. So if you and I concoct some scheme where I misrepresent my financial assets and you say, well, that's okay, I'm not going to press the point, the government still has an interest in me not doing that, because if one is allowed to do that, it can lead to all sorts of wider problems about the underpinnings of the financial system not being trusted.
I am always very reluctant to involve the government in consensual transactions between two individuals if there is no dispute or disagreement between them, why that should be a good thing.
Well, we don't
have the government in.
Well, for a start, would you then back off the Letitia James case in that instance?
In all honesty, probably.
Okay.
I don't really care in either case. I think it's worth pointing out the hypocrisy, but no, I think politically motivated prosecutors or legal officials, if they go over all your forms related to all these things, will always find something you've done wrong and can pursue charges if they want. Have you ever heard that A Crime a Day, a book, where if you go through all of the numerous things we all do wrong, things we violate every day without ever knowing about, if you concentrate on it, you can find something, because it's just too impossible to follow all of it. The tax code is this high. I'm harping on taxes this week because we all just paid them.
Yeah.
But I was trying to go through your deductions. You can get some deduction if you have a home office. Well, what counts as a home office? Well, it has to be a room of, there's getting out the measuring tape. And Is this? And then I'm like, what am I doing? Forget this. I won't even count this as a deduction. Well, but it gets so, you know what I mean?
Yes, but I mean, in that case,
complicated.
But I mean, there isn't very much complicated about going to a bank or financial institution using one of your homes as collateral and tripling the size of the home. That is not an inadvertent mistake. That's not like saying, it's very complicated because you have to calculate, how much of your home is a home office and how much is a residence. It's like basically lying to inflate your assets in order to secure more favorable loans.
Sure, but that's what Letitia James did too, and I just don't care that much.
Well, she didn't inflate her assets. But anyway, the point is, I'm not saying that she should not face no consequences. I'm being more punitive on this matter than you are, Robbie. I think that both of them should face consequences, but Trump's fraud is of a vastly greater scale.
Well, tell us what you think. Next up on Rising, New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez unleashes on President Trump. More Rising right after this.
New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is unleashing on President Trump, calling him every insult under the sun. Ocasio-Cortez let her frustrations fly at a recent rally with Senator Bernie Sanders, calling the president a slew of names. Let's take a look.
Donald Trump is a criminal. He was found guilty of 34 felony counts of fraud, liable for sexual abuse. Of course he is lying and manipulating the stock market too. And if Donald Trump wants to find the rapists and criminals in this country, he needs to look in a mirror today.
AOC and Senator Sanders have been drawing massive crowds throughout their Fighting Oligarchy tour.
The New York Congresswoman is the biggest rising star in the Democratic Party, and her name has been floated as a potential 2028 presidential candidate. Her recent string of rallies with Sanders have dominated headlines, winning her praise from the public. One user on X agreed with her sentiments about Trump, writing, "AOC said what the justice system already proved. Trump doesn't need to fear immigrants, he needs to fear his own rap sheet. 34 felony convictions, a sexual abuse verdict, and still playing the law and order card. The projection is staggering." Another user saying, "Wow, AOC, a House member who isn't in leadership and has a safe seat, raised $9.6 million in the first quarter of 2025. Huge."
Yeah, it's not a surprise. AOC and Bernie Sanders, we talked about this yesterday. They have something. They have some kind of energy on their side, and I think Bernie is very much engaged in this process now of trying to transfer the goodwill and momentum he's always had as a credible working class, populist, democratic socialist, left person, and transfer that momentum to AOC, who I think he sees as his successor. I mean, there's really no one else who has the kind of name recognition and credibility, although I think she appeals to a slightly different crowd. You know, we'll see if working class people, the kind of coalition that Bernie Sanders really had behind him, that did kind of, some of them have, exited that and are fans of Trump, but he has more energy and genuine vibes behind him than anyone else in the Democratic Party. And can AOC inherit all of that, I think, is the question.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I do think that she is plainly the person best placed to inherit that mantle and to carry that torch forward. And I think we were talking yesterday about the fact that this tour they're doing, in a symbolic way, almost seems a little bit like that, a passing of the torch. Now, in relation to what she said about Trump, I mean, those are factual allegations. He has indeed been criminally convicted in relation to fraud. He has been found by a civil jury liable for sexual abuse in the E. Jean Carroll case. The only accusation that AOC made that I think is even questionable is the least serious of them, the idea that he's manipulating the stock market. I'm not persuaded really that him saying great time to buy stocks is any form of manipulation or insider trading. That's just Trump being Trump and cheerleading. But the fact that he has felony convictions, the fact that he had that civil verdict go against him, those are just plain facts, and I think she's more than entitled to bring them up.
She can bring them up. He was impeached twice. He has, yes, that rap sheet. All of this was known to voters when they made the decision back in November. And not only did he win anyway, he won the popular vote. His victory was actually more impressive this time around than it was in 2016, I think I would argue. And that was despite all of that being well known to all of Americans. I don't think there's a single American who isn't aware of the various criminal charges and impeachments. That just didn't matter enough to
Well,
voters,
I
right?
mean,
What can one say? This was put to the vote, and the people said we're overlooking this.
Yeah, but to be fair to AOC, she's not invalidating the election.
Yeah.
She's making the argument that this is not a person of the character or ethics who she believes should be president of the United States.
I guess I'm
And
saying,
she-
don't you just have to come up with a new argument then, if that argument absolutely failed to persuade the first time around? I don't know.
But isn't the whole reason that she's out on this tour that she is now making a new argument about the oligarchy, about the influence of people like Elon Musk, and not only, as it were, name-calling people like Musk or Trump, but arguing that the policies that they are pursuing are damaging and will inflict pain upon American people. That's the argument. The argument is that government has been, as it were, seized by these unethical, extraordinarily rich guys who are using their power to the detriment of the American public.
I guess another line of attack I would have on this, or that I might, if I was a Republican operative, suggest they start raising, is it really the case? I think it's fair to say we're seeing an unprecedented level of support for Trump and his agenda from, yes, very wealthy tech executive business people, but the Democratic Party has also enjoyed the support of these people in the past and maybe would again if they return to power. I think there are some more cynical conservatives who actually do think this is all maybe not Musk, but the Bezos and Zuckerberg in particular, this is all performative to get more favorable treatment. But if Dems were back in power, they'd be right back on board sponsoring all sorts of initiatives that align with progressive policies that Alex Soros was hanging out with Kamala Harris, that was the Illinois Governor Pritzker, who's himself a billionaire, that there's plenty of oligarchical power has been historically behind Democrats and will be again. And so now I know that's not what Bernie Sanders and AOC want. Right. I know that's not their vision for the party.
Not what I want either.
It's not what you want.
Yeah.
Can that? But can that? I guess can that vision for the party actually take over up against such strong financial and political incentives that seem to go the other way? I think AOC is going to have a harder time of it even than Bernie.
Well, look, I have argued on this show a lot of times that there is too much money that just sluices around American politics, and it gives too much money to very wealthy people, whatever the political views of those wealthy people happen to be. By allowing such effectively unregulated spending, you drown out the voices of people who do not have that wealth to draw upon. Now, there is, to your point about Zuckerberg and Bezos and all of that, there are definitely people who are willing to cozy up to power and will do that regardless of who's in power. But I think the danger in this administration is we have seen enormously wealthy institutions, Columbia University, for example, cave to Trump on a matter of central integrity to their own academic system. We have seen law firms cave to Trump over a central purpose that they should have the ability and the willingness to defend people or to represent people who are going against a presidential administration. So I think the problem of people making nice with power is a major problem, and whether they would do it with Democrats or not, they're doing it here and now to Trump while he infringes on these basic rights.
Well, let me go back to Zuckerberg, though, just very briefly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the defense of what he's doing is he's cozying up to power because the government has tried and is trying to destroy his company, right? Is trying to break it up into small little pieces. So why would he not try to have a more favorable relationship with the people in charge of the government? What if they have the power to take his vast, successful social media company and, smash it against the rocks? Well, of course he's going to try to have a better relationship with who's in charge. It would be insane for him not to. It would be contrary. It would be in violation of his obligation to his shareholders not to try to get along better with whoever's in charge. That would be almost suicidally naive to expect that what he's not going to hang out with and try to be nice with. If government has the power over you, over your company, and again, this is my libertarian side of this, while I also bemoan to some extent the influence of money in politics or how much business can influence government, it's because government is so powerful and so vast and can do so much. and can regulate so much and can pick winners and losers. And if the government was less involved in these kinds of things, there would be less incentive to spend money to influence the government. If it was more in line with, going back 250 years ago to our founders, who could have never imagined a federal government powerful enough to do any of these things.
Yeah, but the point is that the financial power that people like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or George Soros have is enormous. You and I and the vast majority of people watching this show do not have that power. And so the propensity to use that level of wealth to, whether it is to protect yourself from the federal government or more likely to redirect the federal government in the ways that you want, is itself bad for the nation as a whole and for democracy, because it drowns out people who don't have that wealth, whether it's Mark Zuckerberg or anyone else.
Up next, a U.S. immigration attorney and American citizen mistakenly received an email saying she has to leave the country. We will discuss with her on the show. Stay with us. So you're being deported. That's what the Department of Homeland Security told a Boston immigration attorney. There's just one problem. She's an American citizen. Nicole Mischeroni received an email last Friday directing her to leave the country within 7 days. It reads in part, quote, "It is time for you to leave the United States. Again, DHS is terminating your parole. Do not attempt to remain in the United States. The federal government will find you. Please depart the United States immediately." The immigration attorney was born in Newton, Massachusetts, and raised in Sharon.
The CBP told NBC 10 Boston, which was the first outlet to report this story, that notices may have been sent to unintended recipients. Joining us now to tell us more is Nicole Mischeroni. Welcome, Nicole.
Oh, thank you.
So this doesn't inspire much confidence, this letter that arrived with you. What do you make of it all?
It does not inspire a lot of confidence. It's concerning. It's confusing. Obviously, I am a U.S. citizen. I was not admitted to the United States under parole, so it clearly does not apply to me. I think the language is very threatening, and it is sent to a lot of people, some of them who it does not apply to, me and many other people like me.
I assume the actual error here, since you are an immigration attorney, is that someone, a client of yours or something, supplied your information, your contact information on some form, and thus this came to you instead of that person. Is that what you judge to be the likely reason here?
I would say that's the most likely scenario. My email is on a lot of different people's immigration paperwork. It's on applications. I do correspond regularly with DHS and ICE via email for various different clients. So it could have gotten in their system in a lot of different ways. That being said, it seems like a lot of people who received this email entered on the CBP One app, which is an app that you download on your cell phone and attorneys do not have access to.
And has DHS subsequently acknowledged that this was sent in error and there's no expectation that you leave the country immediately?
Not to me. I did hear through the media that they would be dealing with this on a case-by-case basis. I would be surprised if they reached out to me and admitted that this was an error. I do not plan to leave the United States either way.
I'm glad to hear that for sure. We like having you here. But I guess to broaden this out to a much more sort of grave issue, this is happening at a time when President Trump is at least hypothetically discussing the possibility of deporting American citizens. He said earlier this week that he would have no problem with doing that, although he wants to examine the legality of that question. Now, to be very clear, that's very separate from what happened to you, which appears to be some form of administrative error. But this idea that he's floating about deporting American citizens, what's your opinion about that?
Well, I think it's clearly illegal and probably unconstitutional to deport American citizens or to send them to prison camps in El Salvador or anywhere else in the world. But I think it really highlights the need for due process here. There are American citizens that have gotten caught up in the immigration system before. This email is an example, but I've seen people in immigration court that are American citizens. I've seen people detained by ICE that are American citizens, and it takes time to prove that you're a U.S. citizen.
I was interested to note that this is a case where a notice was sent that you have a certain amount of time to leave the country. As an immigration attorney, is that how common is that versus what people are seeing and they are concerned about, the deportations or some of the arrests, or I guess detaining because they're not charged with crimes, of, for instance, pro-Palestinian students, where the authorities came and then took them to some detention center, which strikes a lot of people as very sinister. I think maybe you could still argue it's sinister, but less sinister to receive a notice that you have some time period under which you can comply with the law to leave the country. How common is one approach versus the other?
So I think an important distinction is a notice saying that your status has been terminated and you should leave is not the same as a deportation order. So a notice saying you're no longer in status, please leave, I would consider more of a warning, whereas a deportation order is generally, although not always, issued by an immigration judge. So there should be due process where you get to go to court and speak to somebody who can hear your case. And then if you lose your case, that is when a removal order is issued.
In relation to the big picture here, Nicole, obviously there is a lot of controversy around the Trump administration's policies on immigration, generally speaking, and you work in that area. Among people who you may see in your professional life who are here in the United States legally, but perhaps are not yet full US citizens, how much fear is there at the moment? How much confusion is there? What is the atmosphere like among those communities?
There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of confusion. I've never seen anything quite like the last few months with the types and volume of calls we're getting at our office. There are a lot of people that are here legally. They're lawful permanent residents. Sometimes they're naturalized citizens. Sometimes they're native born citizens that have been speaking out on certain political issues. And they're all worried about traveling. I'm getting questions, will I be let in? Could I get detained? I worked on this documentary. Does that mean that I can't apply for this type of visa? So there's a lot of panic in the immigrant community and beyond that.
Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Next up, liberals are coming after our furry, four-legged friends. Our pet dogs are environmental villains? What? Mother Jones, a left-leaning magazine that focuses predominantly on environment and human rights issues, republished an article from The Guardian that says pet dogs have extensive and multivarious impacts on the environment, new research finds. Mother Jones titled the story as "Bad News for Man's Best Friend, Dogs Are Environmental Villains." Ugh.
The Guardian story was based on an Australian review, blame the Australians, published in the Pacific Conservation Biology journal that argues, as the commonest large carnivore in the world, the environmental impacts of owned dogs are extensive and multifarious. They are implicated in direct killing and disturbance of multiple species, particularly shorebirds, but also their mere presence, even when leashed, can disturb birds and mammals, causing them to leave areas where dogs are exercised. Who would have guessed that? It further writes, quote, feces and urine can transfer zoonoses to wildlife and, when accumulated, can pollute waterways and impact plant growth. Finally, the sheer number of dogs contributes to global carbon emissions and land and fresh water use via the pet food industry. Social media, not surprisingly, had a blast with this new study. The Young Turks co-host and executive producer Anna Kasparian wrote on X, "Is there any enjoyable part of life these insufferable killjoys won't attack?"
Meanwhile, contributing editor at The Spectator, Stephen Miller, wrote on X, "Well, I guess when you need to find another 80-20 issue to get behind, this is what you decide to do." And president of the Brownstone Institute, Jeffrey A. Tucker, also chimed in, writing on X, "Among many strange agendas revealed in the COVID period was an attack on pets, dogs in particular. Fauci hinted at their abolition in August 2020 on grounds that they are disease spreaders. I knew this was coming. So I think the direct line between Fauci, actually there is before you roll your eyes too much, we have had on the show, Ryan Grimm was a big fan of this organization, the White Coat Waste Project, because he does not like animal cruelty, and we interviewed guests from this organization in the past that criticized Dr. Fauci for his advocacy of unnecessary experimentation that was harming dogs. So that's not even a weird right-wing attack on Fauci. There's respectable leftist people who didn't like Fauci specifically because of harm to dog stuff. I kid you not.
I take you at your word. I will say there have been so many weird right-wing attacks on Fauci that is why I tend to roll my eyes when he is blamed for attacks upon dogs or whatever. Look, this survey seems pretty ridiculous. I mean, some of the findings that they have produced are just extraordinary statements of the obvious. Dogs apparently scare off birds if they're running around, which I'm glad we have a group of Australian scientists to study that. There was also a finding which we didn't quote, which did amuse me greatly, because it noted that dog feces carry scent traces. So again, the enormous reason.
Is that a way of saying shit smells?
It is indeed. That is exactly the statement, and I'm glad that we have discovered that via the wonders of scientific research.
It's like I don't know. It's one of those things. It reminds me, like, okay, everything causes negative health consequences because we all die in the long run.
This is true.
Like, you could have if humans didn't, humans are the disease. There's no humans. There'd just be plants everywhere. But we are ourselves animals, and we have the right to influence our environment. And human beings have decided that dogs have more objective value than like a worm. So I like birds too. Bird watching is fun. I actually play a board game called Wingspan that is bird themed that I've learned a lot about.
You play so many board games. I'm always fascinated by another excursion into your board game life.
I actually play. There's an app for this one. I play it online with my brother every day.
Okay. Excellent.
So I value birds as well, but we have the right. Man is the master of his domain.
Yes.
We have the right to shape the world to in accordance with what we think is better for artistic merit, for spiritual and emotional and psychological merit. Dogs have merit because they are loyal and trustworthy, and they love human beings, and they have served a socio-biological function over the span of time, going back to when prehistoric man benefited from having dogs in their midst because the dog barks loudly when you have a predator coming or a rival tribe or something. It was they provided that service for us. In exchange, they were fed and cared for and loved. And so over time, wolves have evolved into cute, adorable, wonderful dogs. It's kind of, there's something inspiring about it, that what was most to the species comparative advantage in like a brutalist capitalist sense was to become cuter and fluffier. I find something beautiful about that.
There is something beautiful about it, and I am not going to get myself pinned into the anti-dog seat here. I mean, I think dogs are delightful, and I think they do. I mean, we're having a good time with this absurd story in a way. But, therapy animals and so on. I mean, dogs can serve a really socially useful function. I also think, in terms of that reporting, the idea that which seems to be implicit in it, that there is an environmental impact on carnivorous animals being carnivorous. Like, obviously, if a dog eats something, that other creature ceases to exist. That's literally how nature works. I had some steak yesterday. I have had an environmental impact on whatever cow that originally was, before it was slaughtered. So the idea that there's some environmental impact that is appalling here is kind of weird.
Yeah, that was just very, very strange. The one negative note I will sound on some aspect of the dog issue is these pit bull attacks, are really terrifying.
They are
terrible. Videos of them.
Yeah.
This species poses real dangers and hazards to neighbors, to children, and some people who tend to own them don't take good care of them at all, and that is something to be watched out for.
No, it is, and you know, I mean, like any animal, there's some species and some forms of breeding that create real dangers. That's an entirely different thing from having a research paper that notes that dogs scare birds if they're running around. That seems pretty self-evident.
I had 2 little wonderful Yorkies. Love them very much. Beautiful, beautiful breed.
It is. I had one at one point. But
beautiful. All right. Well, Amber is, I believe, a cat person, so maybe
you
should
go
back over this on Friday.
I'll have to be the pro-dog person then on Friday.
That does it for us today on Rising. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you later.